Good evening, everyone, and good evening to all of you here today. Okay, we know the routine. We're going to begin with prayer before we begin the third chapter of Ruth today. We're going to do just chapter 3. Chapter 4 is going to be very quick next week, but I have a lot of application we have to talk about in regard to it. So that's going to be the cliffhanger for us for next week as we finish Ruth. So before we begin, let's open in prayer. Father, we come before you to thank you for this time together. Your children here in this room, ready to hear from you, to learn from you, and to see what you have to teach us in our hearts and our minds and our souls through this book and through the life of Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi. I pray, Lord, that you would bless this time, that you would be glorified in this time, and that you would speak to our hearts in this hour together. We give this to you in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, all right, so Ruth chapter 3. So we're in Ruth chapter 3, and what I want to do is just start reading it, and then I'll explain all the details as we go. Sound good? All right. Then Naomi. I'm sorry. Ruth chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now Boaz, whose young women you're with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself and put on your best garment and go down to the threshing floor and do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do." Who here in this room has read this chapter before, just like that? Who's familiar with this? Okay, good. It, well, not really. I know. I'm going to demystify that though for you. I'm going to make sure that there's nothing shocking about it at all. Nothing at all. Yeah, there's nothing. That's the point why I wanted to ask why everyone's read it, because there is people, as we read, you'll begin to think that what's really going on, but what you think is going on is not what's going on. So we're going to talk about that. But first, let's talk about what's really happening. So we know the story. Ruth has come back from Moab. They're in Israel. They're in Bethlehem. Okay, that's chapter 1. Now, chapter 2. Let me get it real quick. In chapter 2. What happens is that Ruth, being the woman that she is, being a virtuous woman, which we're going to learn later in this chapter, the word virtuous is used of her, a godly woman, because as you know, her poetic declaration in chapter 1 is, "Your people will be my people, your God will be my God, where you will live, I will live, where you die, I will die, and God do so to me, if anything but death separate you and I." That declaration is what created this chain of events in Ruth's heart to really be a follower of God. And what happens is when they get to Bethlehem, she wants to make good on that fact. So what was the real reason why Naomi, what was the real reason that she went to be with, I'll reverse that. What was the real reason why Ruth went to be with Naomi? What was the real reason she decided to leave Moab and to be with Naomi in Bethlehem? She's going to take care of her. She loves her and wants to care for her, like my wife, you said, and take care of her. So in chapter 2, that's where this work begins. So chapter 1 is really, in a sense, it is this idea of having the resolve of Ruth, we call it love's resolve, to be with Naomi. And then what we have in chapter 2, or that's chapter 1, in chapter 2 we have love's or Ruth's response. Now, a lot of commentators like saying Ruth's or love's response, but really it's Ruth's response. And what that means is, what is her response to being now a member of the Israelite community? And what it is that she goes and she starts providing for Naomi by gleaning. There are 3 laws in this book you need to know. The law of gleaning, the Levirate law, and the law of redemption.
What was the second one?
Levirate, Levirite. Levirate law. I had problems saying it last time, but it's just because I was not thinking of the accent right. But the Levirate law, which is a law that's very important. We'll get into that. I'll get into that later. The law of gleaning, of course, is an important law, I'll tell you right now, because it deals with what has happened in chapter 2, leading us into chapter 3. So there was a social security sort of concept within the Israeli culture. Under the Mosaic law, we discovered that there is a law that God had provided for the widows, the orphans, and the destitute. And that is when you have owners of a land that leased land, that they would be able to glean through the harvest, but they only could go through that land, that plot of land, one time, one take. They can't go back and pick up what they left. And what they would do is that one take, they would leave granary, and if they were in another field that had fruits, they would leave fruits for those who were destitute, widowed, or orphaned to come later in the day, not during the time the workers are working, but to go and glean, take from the field, hence the law of gleaning. It was Israel's way of providing for the poor so that they would have something as well. So, we know that when Naomi and Ruth get to Bethlehem, are they like wealthy? No. Are they just living on the hog? No, they are poor and destitute. Naomi she's a widow because of her husband Elimelech dying. She's also, her 2 sons have died. That's why Ruth is with her. And what we find that she has nothing, and not only that, there's no real land of any kind for her, because whatever they did have, Elimelech had sold for them to then move to Moab. So there really is nothing there for them that they have in any way. So Ruth is then, like many others, having to glean and utilize that law for those who are destitute. And so in chapter 2, we find that Ruth does this. Now, she happens to be in a particular field where a guy named Boaz happens to own this field, and he happens to notice her, and he asks the men, who is this young woman? And the reason why he asks is because he's interested in her, and he wants to know more about who this person is. And they say who she is, and so he tells the workers, allow her to no longer be part of the destitute group. She will be elevated to be part of the working group. And whatever she takes of the first fruits, don't rebuke her, don't bother her, don't harass her. She will have all that you get, and let her have. And so that day, when she goes and she gleans as a promoted person, she goes home with basically 9 gallons of grain, which is about 30 pounds. Naomi sees this and goes, oh, her little wheels are clicking, thinking, no one gleans that much when you're in the destitute, orphan, widowed class. You get maybe not 30 pounds, maybe 2 pounds. So where were you gleaning, Ruth? Where have you been? Because something has happened here. Someone has poured favor upon you, and I want to know what's going on, as any Jewish mother would want to know. And so she says, I was in the field of Boaz. Now, the moment she says that, Naomi knows something about her family. She may have been in Moab for a long time, but believe me, as every good Jewish family has, they've got their lineage out, and she knows in her mind, Boaz, her mind goes, okay, second cousin on the third side. She knows he's a family member immediately. And what happens is her little wheels start clicking very fast, because she knows something has happened. She knows that this man Boaz, by allowing her to be part of the fruit takers or the first fruits workers, she knows immediately this man Boaz, this relative, has interest in Ruth immediately. Because no guy's going to do that. Because as you notice, we're going to read here that there are other young women that were in the field that Boaz has hired. And he's not treating them any differently. Why her? So she's deducing very logically that this man Boaz really has interest. So she's basing everything from chapter 3 as we're reading on that premise. It's all based on Boaz likes her, and I have now a solution, a possible solution to a problem. Now, what is the problem that Naomi has? Number 1, she has nothing. So the Levirate law allows for a widow, and it's always on the initiation of the female, not the male. The widow can claim to her family and say, okay, the closest one to me who's a male, who's single, I'm going to claim you as a man that I would like to marry so that we can have children. The first child I give birth to in that relationship will take the name of my dead husband. In this law, it was the brother who was asked. Now, Naomi, even though she's older, we don't know her age, logically could be the one to claim that. But she's not thinking that way. Because we learn in chapter 1 that she doesn't think that she's old enough to have any children. So she passes that right on to her daughter-in-law. And she gives it to Ruth to now be the woman to then be the person who would then claim the right to ask. Now, remember, the Levirate law has 3 conditions upon the male. Number 1, he has to be a family member. Number 2, he has to have the ability financially to perform the buying of the land of the family that's destitute, or buying for the family the land that is destitute. That second requirement is connected to another law called the law of redemption. I'll get to that later. Because the law of redemption has to do with land. And a kinsman, in our modern Bible, relative, that's what a kinsman is a relative, can buy the land from someone who had to sell it because they were poor. They need the money. And a kinsman can come and buy that land back for the person who sold it. So Naomi she's thinking of, in a sense, Ruth, but it also turns out she's thinking this can solve a lot of issues all at one time. So, I said the second requirement. So the first requirement was relative. Second had to be, they had to have the ability, the resources to buy the land that would alleviate any of the financial obligations upon the family. And third, the male has to just want to do it. Has to be interested in wanting to do it. Now, Roxy, you've asked the question regarding if the male was married. So how this works is that if the closest male relative is married, then it goes to the next relative. And what's going to happen is it's going to go down the line until some male is not married, and that person will then have to be yay or nay. Now remember, there is an entire ritual with this, and it's in Deuteronomy chapter 25. We're going to read that later, not yet. We're going to read it later. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 through 10. Those verses deal with the actual law and what really happens in that negotiation. Okay? So, that's the backdrop of what's happening before chapter 3. And then we just read that Naomi says, very simply here, she says here at chapter 3, verse 1, my daughter, shall I not seek security for you? Now, if you have a King James version, it'll say, and my mind has forgotten this. This is the King James. If you have, it's not the best rendering, though I like the King James very much. It is, I think it's called, oh gosh, what is it?
What are we looking at?
Actually, I know, Paul, you've got a King James. Is that a King James?
No, mine's King James.
Oh, read yours, baby.
What am I reading?
Oh, read verse 1.
Of what?
And shall I not, chapter 3, verse 1. Shall I not seek blank for you? I'm just having a blank on it. I should
Seek rest. Seek rest.
Rest, that's it. So in the King James it says rest, but in your modern Bibles it say security. Is that what you have in your Bibles?
Permanent home.
Okay, that works too. That works too. What it means is this. Naomi is saying to Ruth, I want you to have security under the umbrella of marriage. That's what it means. So Naomi's made it very clear, Ruth, I want you to proceed with an idea. And this idea is, I would like you to proceed by moving in and claiming your right to ask for marriage. That's what's happening here. Okay? All right? Yes, matchmaker, give me a match. That is a great movie, by the way. Oh, it's a great play. It's a great musical. It's not a play, it's a musical. But that's great. Put it on the roof. Excellent. It was my wife who was with you that I saw for the first time. I felt like, how did I live this long and not see that musical? But then again, it was with you I saw American in Paris. I thought, why have I lived this long and not seen that musical? Oh my gosh, I am a loser.
You never had eggplant either.
I know. I've been deprived in so many things. That's why I married up, baby. I married you. I married up with you.
You mean the musical, not the movie?
Well, the musical's great, but the movie is a great introduction to wanting to see the musical. I've never seen the musical. I've seen the movie, though. The movie is the musical, but it actually is a musical. So the actor who plays the father is actually the same exact actor who played it in the musical in London. And so it is a musical, but it was made into a movie like in 1971 or 70.
It's better to see the musical.
Well, I think the musical is probably more engaging, but the movie is the best way to see it, the story first. Oh, we have someone who agrees that the movie is better. The movie was actually very good, though, a very good movie. So here we have this. It says here, "Shall I not seek security for you, that I may be well with you?" In other words, through marriage. Now, Boaz, whose young women you are with, is he not our relative? So this is now her appealing to the law. Now, Ruth may not understand any of this right now. She has no idea where Naomi is going with this, because she herself was not raised in this environment. So she may not be aware of Levirate law. She may not be aware of it at all. What she's doing is she's listening and receiving what Naomi is saying. In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. That's important. We'll get to that in a minute. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself and put on your best garment. Now, the word best garment here can either mean something that's very beautiful, like what you've got, but also can be something that you will wear that you can wear for the whole night, because she's going to be outside the whole night. That's the point. Naomi knows this. Naomi knows exactly what she needs to do. Naomi is going to coach her on understanding this particular law, because Ruth has no understanding of it. And so Naomi knows, exactly. Naomi knows Boaz has got interest in Ruth. We already know that in chapter 2. There's something there. Naomi's going to take advantage of this, and she's going to see if Boaz wants to bite at the bait. But the bait has to be initiated by Ruth. So Ruth doesn't know, because she's not from that culture. So Naomi's going to say, here's what you got to do. You're going to wear something warm, but also wear something beautiful. You're also going to anoint yourself, put some perfume on, get yourself looking pretty, and then you're going to be doing something. And so here's what happens. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. Now, how Naomi knows that he will do that, or even tell her what to do, shows that she's very on top of Mosaic law. Because everything in that culture is based on the law. You think it's hard living in California. California is becoming a horrible place when it comes to laws, because everything's just being pounded on us. You live the Mosaic law. That's a whole different matter. You wake up and you got to look at the laws. Okay, what laws do I have to take care of today? What laws do I have to fulfill today by noon? What laws do I have by 5 p.m.? What laws? That's a hard way to live. But Naomi knows what's going to happen, because she knows that Boaz will understand what is going on. So, what is this whole idea of the threshing floor? What's the idea of Boaz drinking and marrying and sleeping? And what's all this all about? So what we have to understand is that there is, within the harvesting time frame, whether it be the wheat harvest, which we are assuming we're in right now, we're a little ways after the barley harvest, but it's during this time. And what's happening is you have an activity that goes on outside. And the activity deals with a thing called the threshing floor, which is an outdoor area. It's a public area. And it's an area where there's a stone slab. And it's usually an area that gathers wind. It could be like in a valley. Usually it's best in a valley. If you need a real visual, think of Banning Pass going to Palm Springs. Just some area where wind is coming through a lot. That's where you want to imagine, area where wind is going. But there is another way they do this if there's no wind. So there's a plan B. I'll explain the plan B to you in a second. So what happens is they gather, in their gathering in the harvest, they gather all of the wheat. But the wheat also has enclosed little areas called chaff, and they try to separate them. But it's hard to pick them out. So what they do is they take the wheat and the chaff and they throw it in the air. As it goes into the air, the wind blows the chaff and blows the wheat. It blows both. But the chaff goes farther. The wheat, yes, right. The wheat is heavier, so it flows only a little bit. And what the idea is that you will end up having, over a period of a day or two, you will have piles of chaff, piles of wheat, and so forth. Okay, these piles get pretty big. So now the thing is that when the wheat falls and you have this, and you have these piles, the piles have to be protected. So what happens is the workers of the owner of that land, so Boaz is a wealthy landowner, he has workers, and these workers are going to guard these piles. They're not small little piles. They've been doing this for a long time, and it's just piles and piles and piles and piles. Well, it turns out that someone's got to guard each pile. So there's people guarding, so there's lots of piles, and Boaz is deciding he's going to sleep by one particular pile. But before this is done, this is the end of the harvest, there's a big, big party. It's a celebration. That's why it says here, after he's drinking and merry. Why is that? Because the community gets together, thanking God for the harvest that they have gotten, and they have a great big festival. It's a great big celebration. And in this celebration, what happens is that they all get together, they all have food, have a great feast, and then the owners and the workers will stay. The people in the community will not. They may go back home. But the owners of the land and the workers will stay to protect what they have because of marauders or thieves that may come and steal. The chaff will be burned. It's just put in a fire and burned. What is left, barley or wheat, is sold at market or kept for the family. So therefore, there's a financial value to this. So what Naomi is saying to Ruth is, when he is already sleeping on his pile, and his workers, and by the way, these piles, I said, are large, and there is a little bit of an element of privacy because you're going to have piles everywhere. Guards are on the perimeter, and usually because the festival was at the center and no one puts a pile where the threshing floor is because it's always being used, you put your piles separately in sort of a circular motion around the threshing floor. And so because of that, you are having all these different piles of different people spread out. So she has to find him. That's the point. Naomi knows that. And it's going to be late. So she doesn't want to, Naomi says, don't make yourself known to him. In other words, don't be there and be tempted to be part of the festivities. I want your mind to be clear. I want your presence to be there. I don't want you to be influenced by anything at all. I want you to go there. And as he's resting, I want you to be by him, and I want you to do something specific. And what she tells her to do, as she says, is that I want you to uncover his feet and lie down. The reason why is because it is Naomi telling Ruth, the way you're going to wake him up is you're going to take his sandals off his feet. So Naomi wants Boaz to be awoke, to be wakened up. And the nicest, respectful way to do that, because he is the owner of the land, is to have Ruth come very gently and take the sandals off his feet, and that will, well, you'll see as the text goes, does the trick. So verse 5, and she said to her, Ruth hears all this, and it says, all that you say to me, I will do. She obeys what Naomi is saying, and she'll do it. So in verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her. And after, verse 7, after Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. So that's where he's lying now. And she came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Verse 8, now it happened at midnight that the man was startled. Now, if you have an Old King James, it'll say afraid. The word afraid is an Old King James version, but being startled is the actual proper term. Most modern translations will probably have that. So startled means startled, but it's not being afraid, technically. And turned himself, that means he moved his entire body, and there a woman was lying at his feet, and he said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maidservant. And I will stop right there, but the next part is important. So, as I explained, she does exactly what she's instructed by Naomi to do. He is sleeping. She takes the sandals, wakes him up. He asks, who are you? And then she says, what is not said about her in the past, Ruth the Moabitess. Remember when Boaz asked the workers, who is that woman? They said, that's Ruth the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi. That's not how she calls herself here. She calls herself by only the name Ruth and gives herself the title of maidservant. That means she's coming in submission to his authority. Okay? It's important. And she's saying something else. If you have another version of the Bible, it'll say, I'm your handmaid or handmaiden. And that means I am eligible for marriage. So maidservant as servant who is eligible for marriage. That is what Ruth is saying here. Now this is the ritual that occurs. Now Boaz is not, he understands exactly what she's going to do. She's not said what she needs to say yet. It's going to happen in a second. But I want to lay out what's happening here. So she's going by the law. She's coming to his feet, which means she's not a person usurping authority over him. She's not also coming to threaten him. She's at a feet at a distance, and she's just trying to find a way to wake him up as Naomi explained to her how to do it. And then when he asks her who she is, then she says, I am your maidservant, I'm Ruth. So that Boaz knows who she is. And that in that statement, she's saying, I am eligible. And then she comes and does, well, what every girl does at City Hawkins. And that is this. She takes the initiative. She takes the initiative and says at verse 9, take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative. Now, in other versions, because other versions may seem a little bit more, well, honey, read what it says in the King James at verse 9. At the end where it says take, it'll say something else.
It does say something.
Yeah, it does.
I'm Ruth, thy handmaiden, spread therefore thy skirt
Spread therefore thy skirt, and continue.
over thine handmaid.
Over that handmaid, exactly. So when you read it that way, it sounds like she's propositioning him. It sounds like she's wanting to engage in a sexual relationship, the way it sounds. The problem is, that's not what the King James is really saying. There's something you need to know about hems of garments. When it says in the King James, spread your skirt, what she's saying there, in our modern translations, it's not saying that. It's saying it in our vernacular of what it means. But when the King James, you're thinking, what does that mean? The skirt itself it's a euphemism, an analogy of, I want your protection over me. And usually when you have men or anyone in Israeli culture who has a certain rank or position, do you know where that position's seen on the body? It's seen at the hem of the skirt. The hem of the it's not where we have up here, like if you're a police officer or something, or you're a doctor or someone in the military, you have some chevron or something on your collar. That's not what it was back in those days. It was towards the bottom. Think about the woman in the New Testament who had the issue of blood. Okay, this connection's amazing. Because as you know, in the New Testament, there's a woman who had an issue of blood, and the New Testament says, and she thought to herself, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I'll be healed. Well, did she touch the hem of his garment? Yeah. Yes. Was she healed? Yes. Do you know that as she was a Gentile, do you know that she was appealing to the Mosaic understanding of rank? She knew that if I could just touch the end of his garment, that would be the most authoritative part of his authority represented. If I can just touch that, it'd be no different than a person saying, if I can just touch the general star, I'll be healed. That's the same thing that's being said here, not one in the New Testament. So when we read that in Matthew, you read that the woman touches the garment. So when you're talking about have your garment upon me, what that means is have your authority, your rank, your position upon me. So what she's saying in a very eloquent statement is, will you marry me? And as you marry me, will you have your protection and authority over me? Okay, that's what's being said here.
Okay, that's
all right?
better.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So it's not in any way, it's not a proposition. Now, a lot of sometimes even pastors, teachers, even other Christians don't quite get this. They just haven't quite done the homework. And don't understand that this is not a sexual scene here, but so many people think that it is. And there's nothing about it at all. As a matter of fact, there's more that goes on to explain that it's not in any way. But it's important that we understand what the vernacular and what the words mean and what they're trying to convey to us. So in our version, as we said here, take your maidservant under your wing. Where the King James says, have your skirt come over me. It is, have you come under your wing, for you are a close relative. Now when she says that, she is claiming love of right law. And that's the term right there. You're a close relative. So if you're a guy, you're not figuring out what's going on, you can say, oh, you like the fact that I'm wealthy, you like the fact that I have land, you like the fact that I can provide for you, but there's something else that she's throwing in there. Close relative. Now she's doing this not entirely. Well, I need to be careful when I say this. She's not doing this entirely because she's saying, I just can't wait to be this guy's wife. She's doing this because Naomi has told her to do this. Because she has seen that there's something about this guy that suggests he wants to be with her. And she, out of obedience and care for Naomi, is putting aside any other passions she may have to fulfill what Naomi wants. This is a very subtle thought that people don't pick up on. That Ruth is putting aside her whatever is in her younger heart to fulfill this desire of Naomi, because Naomi knows something about Boaz's interest in Ruth. Now, she's claiming love of right law. And from that, it says here, because you are a close relative. Now verse 10 is Boaz. He responds to this. Now he understands what's happening. Okay, who are you? Okay, I know you. Oh yeah, I know who you are. Oh yeah, you're the cute girl in the fields. Okay. Now why are you here? And she says, I want your authority and you want your protection. I want basically you to be my husband. She's asking him to marry her is what she's doing. And oh, by the way, you're the close relative. In other words, the law of the kinsman redeemer is now in effect here. Okay, which is a little bit less. So that's very important. So here we have, in verse 10, his response. And he says something about her. He notices something about her that explains more about her personality. Then he said, blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. What do you think she means by that? Or what he means by that? What he means by that is she, being younger, could have married anyone that was her same age group. Boaz is in his 40s, late 40s, mid-late 40s, could be even early 50s. We assume that Ruth is in her early 20s at the most, maybe mid-20s at the oldest. So it's not her age bracket. It's like water finds its own level. He's saying, you didn't go after the younger men. That shows that she was younger, whether rich or poor. Now, there's something amazing about that fact. Because you see, had she done that, there would have not been a redeemer, because they would not have been a close relative in any way. You see, it's only Boaz that this could have worked with. But we're going to find out there's someone else other than Boaz. There's somebody else. There's always another person around, always. So we got to deal with that. He's saying, you could have married anyone, and you decided that you would give up your right to marry someone on your own to then fulfill your mother-in-law's wish. That's what Boaz is saying. You're quite the woman. You're willing to marry me? Is that what you really want to do? Because I'm not young. I'm not a 22-year-old guy, is what he's basically saying. And so he's saying your kindness and wanting to ask me in marriage when you did not have the desire to marry younger people, rich or poor. Then he says this, and now, my daughter, obviously referring to her age, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman, showing that she is a woman of moral character. So this is not a proposition of any kind. This shows you that she's doing exactly what the Mosaic law wants and desires and requires for this law. And it's funny, it says the whole town, my town knows that you are. In other words, her reputation has preceded her. So apparently, as a Gentile non-Israelite, she is showing the town what a great woman is. She's becoming a model for women who should be more like her, apparently. Verse 12, now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Now that shows that Boaz is being truthful. He could have said, I like Ruth. I don't want this to pass me up. I'd rather just grab this while I can and not say anything about it and not worry about it. But he himself is also bound by the law. So he fulfills requirements. He is a relative. He can take care of her financially, and he's willing to do it. He fits the requirement. He fulfills all of them. But there's another problem. He's not the closest relative. Remember what I said before. You go down the line as you go through. So if it's not a brother, or if it's not, let's say you're a widow, and you and your husband who died had brothers. If it isn't the brothers, it's got to be a cousin of the brothers. If the cousin's got to be maybe a nephew of the brother or an uncle, whatever it may be, you go down the line. And it turns out there's someone that is closer to Ruth than Boaz himself is. And he's letting her know that. He's saying right off the bat, here's the deal. There is a relative closer than I. Verse 13, stay this night. In the morning it shall be that if you will perform the duty of a close relative for you, then good. In other words, stay here, don't go back home. Why? Because his workers are there. They're guarding all of the wheat, all of what they've gained. And she knows, and it's at midnight, he wants her to be safe. So stay here, you're protected here by my employees. We're all up. He's up now. His workers were going to be up all night anyway because they were standing guard for what they had already threshed. Threshing is the whole concept of doing the action of throwing the wheat and the chaff up in the air. So they're up all night. It's an all-nighter. It's like doing inventory. So stay here. You're protected. And then what's going to happen is he says, I will. Now he's going to do the work. Therefore, I will go this night. Verse 13, it shall be that I will, if he performs the duty of a close relative, I'll ask him. And if he wants to perform that duty, then great. We fulfill the law and all is good. Now, deep down, Boaz wouldn't want that, but he has to fulfill the law. And so he says, that's fine if it works. Let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you. As the Lord lives, lie down until the morning. So, in other words, he has made an oath, and the oath is based on as the Lord lives. That's Boaz saying, I've made a deal. I've made the oath. The oath is that I'm going to take care of this in 24 hours. That's what he's saying. And one day you'll get your answer. And so he has laid out what he's going to do in those 24 hours. He's going to talk to this other relative, which we're going to learn in chapter 4, and he's going to ask the relative, what say you? But the way that Boaz does it is very clever. He's very clever in how he does this.
He told him, she's ugly.
No, not really. He could have done that. He could have said that. But this explains in many ways what the other relative's answer explains the issue of what you would ask regarding, not specifically, but it gives us an answer on what do you do if you're already taken? What do you do if there's something else, other obligation that you have? But Boaz doesn't want anything to chance. He wants to make sure that he offers by law what he's got to do to the closer relative, but he's very, very crafty on how he brings out the information. And so we're going to learn that next time. So she's to spend the night there. So what does he do? He goes somewhere else. He goes to another pile and lays on the pile, allows her to be there to be safe. And then when he says here in verse 14, so she lay at his, well, actually, forgive me. Go on. I was ahead of myself. Scratch what I said. She lay at his feet until morning, and she rose before one could recognize another. And then he said, do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And the reason he says that, don't let anyone know that someone's seen you, is he doesn't want gossip to be going around the town that something untoward had happened. Because he knows his community. In a small town like Bethlehem, everyone knows each other's business. So he says, stay here the night, you're protected, but leave before everyone else goes. And don't let people see you, so that there would not be rumors that something unpleasant or not right had happened, which nothing did. And so therefore he lets her go at that point. And then it says here, Then he said, do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, verse 15, bring the shawl that is on you and hold it. So here's the morning time before she goes. She's probably half awake. She says, I need your shawl. She holds the shawl, and what's he do? And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley. We had 9 ephahs in chapter 2, which was 30 pounds of it, 5 gallons of it. 9 gallons of it, not 5 gallons, 9 gallons, 30 pounds. This is 6 of it. And laid it on her. Then she went into the city. Then she came to her mother-in-law. She said, is that you, my daughter? And then she told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, these 6 ephahs of barley he gave me, for he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Now, the key question here is, why did he give her all of it? Why did he give her 6 ephahs of barley? Why that? Why that number specifically? And why only to Naomi? It was to be given to her as a gift. But why the 6? We know why the barley is obviously valuable. You have food, you can eat, you can make things out of it. That's obvious. But why only 6 ephahs of it? Go back to the creation. Numbers have meaning sometimes. So, when did God rest? On the 7th day. So as we read the last verse of chapter 3, it's not going to be a surprise to you that Boaz says, I will not rest until this matter is solved. So the 6 ephahs of barley are designed primarily to give Naomi. Ruth may have no understanding of this. It's above her head. It's to tell Naomi, I accept what you have done. You're the matchmaker. I get it, Naomi. You're the one who did this. I'm going to accept that offer, and I'm not going to rest until it's resolved completely to our satisfaction. So therefore, the 6 means that Boaz is getting to work as God was at work in the 6 days of creation. Does that make sense? Okay, so therefore we get to the last verse, and it says here, then she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest. Now remember, he didn't speak to her. She just knows by how much he gave what he's going to do. It's like a code. It's like a sign language. It's like, oh, I get what he's doing. I know what's happening here. And so he will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. So within that day, it'll be mattered. And so Ruth chapter 4 is what Boaz does to secure what happens here, because there was an obstacle in mind. So when we get together next week, what's going to happen is we're going to get through that chapter pretty quick. And then I'm going to talk about what its application is to the church, what its application is to the return of Jesus Christ, what its application is to all of us in relation to our relationship with Jesus Christ for eternity. There's some connection in this book that has larger implications than just a love story between 2 people with some Mosaic laws thrown in to kind of give us some intrigue and insight. There's more going on here. So that's what's going to happen next week.